That's a topic I wanted to ask you guys about, animating in Grasshopper. I haven't found a proper way to do it, like exporting JPEG while you change an index.
If you can construct your whole animation to work off of one slider, you can just animate the slider. Have you done that?
No. Is that built in Grasshopper?
Yeah, I'll show you an example.
Oh, what?
I'll show you an example. If we go into animate, it's going to ask us to create our file path right here, and then it will tell us what it would ask us what we want our naming, our kind of naming format to look like, and then it will just add an extra index to each one, and then it asks how many frames you want to export, and then we'll just divide your minimum and maximum numbers into how many frames you want. So I just try to make the number of this is 0 to 1.000. So if I just go through this manually, I can basically see what each frame will look like, because this is 1,000 frames from 0 to 1.000 is 1,000 frames, and then you can choose your resolution.
And it will export the viewport setting, or
it will export the viewport. I think it will export your active viewport. Oh no, right here it asks you. Right here it asks you which viewport you want to export.
Oh, nice.
So.
No way. Okay, that really helped.
And it's fast. This took like a couple seconds. So here's a way that you can, if you want to. This is kind of like a hacked way to what am I trying to say, to simulate your animation. If you use the timer component, basically the timer component is, I don't know if you guys are aware of what it does, but it's how do I explain it? It's basically asking the component that you plug it into to regenerate, to recalculate. So if I plug it into this component, it's going to ask it to recalculate every 1 second, depending on what my interval is. And you can change the interval here. And then if you put so you add whatever interval you want to. So I'm going to make a different example. I'll make it count up from 1. So, so if we set our number to be 1, and then, so it's basically it's recalculating 1 every 1 second. So if we go to a record component and we clear this out, it's going to calculate 1 every 1 second. And then so it's just making a list of ones. And then if we put it into the mass addition component, then it's just going to count up. So we basically just have a counter. And I just use this function to simulate my animations before I export them. Because now we can just plug it into where our animation slider is functioning, and then we can just see what it looks like before we actually export it. But you have to change your interval depending on how big my animation just goes from 0 to 1. So my interval is 0.001 or 0.002, I guess. I was trying to run it faster. So it may not be the right thing for what you're trying to do. Just because it's a little tricky to generate an animation, because everything has to come off of one slider. But all I do is I use that one slider to, and then I just modify the values that are coming out of that slider. So I'll just put the slider into graph mappers, and then I'll use that for this component. I'm doing a bunch of things. I'm scaling it. I'm doing rotations. I think it's rotating twice, and I'm scaling it once. And there's a few things that it's doing, but every time it goes to something like right here, it's acting as a scale factor for some of the geometry. That slider is acting as a scale factor. And so I had to modify the value, because right now it's at like 0.3, and I just modified the value with a graph mapper, and then I threw it into that scale factor. As just, is one example of how that's working. And then somewhere else, it's acting as it's creating a rotation somewhere. Oh, here, yeah. So I'm doing a bunch of math to it, and then it's acting as I'm using that number that's been modified, and then it's creating different angles. This is all grafted information, because there's 3 different shapes So it's 3 different angles coming in. But like in this script, for example, I used that one number that's going 0 to 1, and then I used the random component, and then I divided it by 3 random numbers so that I have 3 different numbers coming out of it, and that's how I'm creating like the random rotation when this thing happens. So that's how I do like simple animations.